Our scripture reading is in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12. Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Now, this is nothing new to us. And in fact, we'll note here in just a moment that it is a very common theme in a lot of different religions other than Christianity. But it is somewhat reasonable that if you don't want someone stealing from you, you don't steal from them. If you don't want someone taking your spouse, you don't take theirs. If you don't want someone to beguile you, to defame you, well, you don't go and defame someone else. You don't want to be lied to, you don't lie to others. It's kind of common sense. The issue is when we've been mistreated. And then how do we respond? But let's go ahead and we'll note some of the different religions out there and what they would say along these same lines. Buddhism, do not offend others as you would not want to be offended. In Islam, none of you are true believers until you love your brother what you love for yourself. In Judaism, and interesting, we'll note here in just a moment, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. In other words, this sums up everything. In fact, that's pretty much what Jesus said. He says, for this is the law and the prophets, that whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. Now, the Torah, of course, was a huge expanded part of what wasn't the old law. It's the law that man had added to the law. But let's continue. Confucianism, is there one word which can serve as the guiding principle for conduct throughout life? Confucius says it is the word altruism. Do not do to others what you do not want them to do to you. It's kind of in the negative. And so if you don't want someone doing that to you, you don't do that to them. In Sikhism, I am a stranger to no one, and no one is a stranger to me. Indeed, I am a friend to all. It gives us that idea that you don't ever meet a stranger. But there are some people who have the mentality that until you prove that you're not my enemy, I'm going to kind of treat you as an enemy, or I'm going to treat you as if I don't know you. And we know that concept can be flipped for us. For myself anyways, coming from a family that was huggers and so on, and at least on my mom's side. My dad's side, they definitely kept their space and so on, but maybe you can relate to this in your family, that if your child brought a friend home, you might go and hug them, and so, because there's a connection already. You treat someone that you've never met before, but you know that they're a cousin, and you treat them like family. But we can treat strangers like family just the same. That's actually the true part of hospitality. This last one is Taoism. Regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. Now, he's not saying, okay, since you don't have it, I get it. But it's the idea in Romans chapter 12 and verse 15 that we'll weep with those who weep and we rejoice with those who rejoice is kind of the principle. So we can go definitely outside of this realm of doing to others as you would want them to do unto you and start making some specific application. And I'd like to do so by first turning over to Genesis chapter 1. And we're going to note verses 11 and 12 specifically. So in Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 11, then God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. We would also see in later passages, such as in verse 24, each according to its kind. And over, each according to its kind. Now, how frustrating would it be? Now, there are times when you have they'll send out these seed packets, and it's a freebie, and you don't know what it is. But typically, it'll be marked what that is, because you need to sow it in a particular season, whether that's in the fall or in the winter. We'll make note of that here in just a moment, so kind of lock that in the back of your mind as we move forward, because we'll be talking about seasons. But there's the curiosity and the excitement of sowing something and seeing what happens, because sometimes you can get some flower seeds and they don't tell you what that flower is, and so you sow it and voila. But what if that was the case in regard to everything? No matter what seed you sowed, you didn't know whether you were going to get broccoli or you were going to get corn. You didn't know whether you were going to get cauliflower or you were going to get green beans. And let's say you don't like any of those. We would be in a world of hurt. We understand the concept that we sow a green bean, you get green beans. We take that for granted. Now, evolutionists would say, no, that's not the case. In fact, we're still looking for the missing link, right? Because it would be immediate. It would be immediate. I mean, we would have the crocodile giving birth to a monkey. But no, guess what? Crocodiles produce crocodiles. Monkeys produce monkeys. And so we rely upon the fact that the seed is in the plant. And that if you plant the seed that came out of that plant, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get the same plant. And so when we take that for granted, we don't always take it for granted in other areas of our lives and how we should live ourselves. But the truth is that we do reap what we sow. Notice over in Job chapter 4 and verse 8, Job is really vacillating over what's happening to him. And he is a righteous man. He is a good man. And all these bad things are happening to him. And he is starting to question why. And he says, even as I have seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. I understand that if I sow, I will reap. If I sow iniquity, that's exactly what I'm going to reap. If I sow trouble, that's exactly what I'm going to get. And so over in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7 we read, do not be deceived, God is not mocked, for whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. Well, he's going to go a little bit deeper in this in regard to making a specific application. He's certainly not talking about sowing a tomato seed and receiving a tomato plant, or a tomato plant being grown. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 8, Galatians 6 and verse 8, he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. So we understand that this body is going to decay one day. It's going to be destroyed. It's going to turn back to dust. If we put all of our desires and wants and affirmations and the things that we're trying to achieve all in the flesh, if you will, that if we're putting all of that in a basket, what are you going to have in the end? You're not going to have anything. It's all going to be corruption. It's going to be temporal, right? But if we sow to the Spirit, and in the sense where we're putting this in the basket, what are you going to have at the end? What we're sowing, we're going to reap. If we sow to the Spirit, we'll reap everlasting life. And so, which basket are we filling the most? Is it the things of this world or the things of the Spirit? And of course, we're encouraged to sow to the Spirit. In this context, we see in verses 19 through 21 about the works of the flesh. And it goes through a whole litany of of sins that are listed there. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Let's read that just a little bit slower because this is going to apply later on in our lesson. But the fruit, again, you have a fruit tree. You plant an orange tree so you can get oranges. In this scenario, you want to get something back out of it. But the fruit of the Spirit, this is what the Spirit produces, is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. 9 things are listed here. He says, against such there is no law. In other words, you can abound in those. Fill your basket full to the brim. Lock that back in your mind also. We'll be talking about that here in just a moment. So, in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 6, we did overlook verse 10 there in Galatians chapter 6. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. We have to look for those opportunities. They're not going to necessarily just fall into our laps. 2 Corinthians 9 verse 6, but this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. He who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So, this last spring, Dolly says, I do not want a big garden. We're only going to get, she said, 1 pack of tomato plants. And that's a 6-pack. She came home with 2. So, okay, I am not guilty of planting more in the garden than what she wanted. But we understand the concept that if you don't plant it, it's certainly not going to produce anything. Right? And the more you sow, the more you're going to reap. Even if not everything germinates, even if there is some losses along the way, we know that the more we sow, the more we're going to get back. The less we sow, we can't expect a lot from nothing. The great thing is, as a song, I don't know if we've sung it here or not, is that you can count the seeds in the apple, but you can't count the apples in the seed. We have the norm is that we get back more than what we actually do sow. You don't plant a tomato seed and get 1 tomato. In fact, we always make a comparison and we always count. No matter how big the potato is, you sow a potato. In fact, you can take a potato and cut it up in 6 different chunks and plant that and get plants out of all 6 different chunks. But let's just say you just plant that 1 potato seed, and then you go and count, and we've had as many as 30 potatoes from 1 planting. That's great, right? But if we're sowing to the flesh, we're going to get more than what we planted. If you sow to the Spirit, you're going to get more than what you planted. None of us deserves heaven, but heaven can't even be compared to what we have given, if you will, to the Lord, what we've laid up, our treasures up in heaven, what we've sown to the Spirit. We're going to get far more than we could ever have put in, if you will. You put $10,000 in a mutual fund, a stock, whatever, and you want to see that grow. Why is it that oftentimes we don't really apply that to our lives and how we conduct ourselves? In Luke chapter 6 and verse 38, give and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. There's that concept of bountiful, right? You're getting more than what you can hold. You can't even, the container's overflowing. And running over will be put into your bosom, for with the same measure you use, it will be measured back to you. And we can't help but think of Psalm 23. He says, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. If we would only realize how blessed we are, and that we need to be givers. We need to sow and sow, because we've been given the gospel, so we sow the gospel in return. We sow to the Spirit. We do not care about the flesh. We're not going to satisfy the flesh. We're not going to resurrect that old man. We're going to be renewed in spirit day by day, and just keep on fighting and keep on giving and loving and caring. These fruits of the Spirit, to love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Because we need to be reminded that there is also judicial judgment. That one day we will be judged. Going back to the statement of Jesus, therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. And he says, for this is the law and the prophets. Whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. Well, over in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 18 we read, you shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. To love your neighbor as yourself. You want to be loved, so you love. We understand that. The challenge is, as we'll get here in just a moment, is when we are not loved, that we still have the responsibility to love back. But in Exodus chapter 21 and verse 23, but if any harm follows, and talking about a feud between two individuals, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Now, this is a judicial law. It is not encouraging people to take the law into their own hands, which would be a vigilante. That's exactly what a vigilante does. Turn over to Romans chapter 12 and we'll notice a few passages there. A vigilante says, okay, the law's not going to take care of it. I will. I tell you, Dolly and I, we like these true crime stories and so on. But, boy, if someone were to do something to one of my daughters or one of my girls, I would say, which would include Dolly, I would be tested. The concept of don't let the sun go down on your wrath, and also in judicial law, under the old law, the idea that if someone breaks into your house and you defend yourself, you have the right to even kill the person under the old law, and because there's life at stake. You're not guilty. But it says if the sun comes out, it's the idea of you wait till tomorrow and now you go and look for the guy. No. That's now murder, not self-defense. So over in Romans chapter 12, we notice in, let's drop down to verse 14. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Verse 17. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. Our tendency is to retaliate. In fact, in the Sermon on the Mount, we've already looked at that in different places, and we're going to go back and just kind of refresh our memory here in just a moment. But that's our tendency. And in fact, I remember reasoning with myself and then also expressing this to my mother when I was a little boy, that do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. Well, he hit me, so he must want me to hit him. I'm justified. Certainly that's not what Jesus is talking about. And even under the judicial law of the old law, the law of Moses, there was a responsibility that justice be served, but not by the, necessarily anyways. There were times where the parent had to throw the first stone to execute their own child, in fact. But it was still on the premise that it was a judge and jury making this decision. It was not the parent just taking the child out and saying, okay, I brought you into this world, I'm going to take you out, and it's fixing to happen right here and now. And so what we're taught under the new covenant is repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. All men. That's the good and the bad. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. That's his duty. Therefore, if your enemy hungers, feed him. If he thirsts, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. There's the fruit. You're going to help him out. You're going to be an aid to him. And hopefully that'll turn him around. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. Unless. Are there any qualifiers in our own minds? Do we say, unless they crossed this line? Unless they've done this? Unless they've done that? We've got to be careful that we do not put ourselves in the place of God. And so the biggest challenge that we will all have is to be loving even after being mistreated. You've heard me emphasize this, and so we won't spend a lot of time. Over in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 11, we are going to become marks because we're going to be righteous, and there is a lot of evil out there. They're looking for those who are naive. They're looking for the vulnerable. They're looking for the giver. Isn't it horrible that someone, and the evil person, if you will, asks another, a good person, hey, can you spare $5? And they pull out their wallet, and then that person just grabs the wallet and runs off. Or worse, shoots them right then and there, kills them. And it's because of the generosity of the good. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. Not as Cain, who was of the wicked one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his works were evil, and his brothers, of course Abel, his brothers righteous. Do not marvel, my brethren, if the world hates you. So sometimes, even though you are treating people how you want to be treated, you are loving and caring and kind and helpful and generous and forgiving and long-suffering, they use that to their advantage. But the principles still remain. Turn over to Luke chapter 6. Now this is Luke's account of the same sermon. Or if it's not the same sermon, the exact same sermon, it would be the teaching of Jesus on this particular subject matter. So in Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 27, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you. Love your enemies? Do good to those who hate you? Bless those who curse you? And pray for those who spitefully use you? This is exactly what we see over in Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount. To him who strikes you on the one cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who asks of you. And from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. Now, how about that? Someone takes off with your wallet. Do you want your wallet back? Yeah, we want our wallet back. Is that a transgression of the law? It's the concept that I'm not going to retaliate, ultimately. That the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, going back to Job. but also the principle that if God gave it to me the first time, he can give it to me again. The responsibility is on my shoulders that I do not put myself in the place of God to retaliate. And so here we go in verse 31. And just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. But if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. That's no big deal. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. Isn't it ironic that the thief doesn't want to be stolen from? And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, hoping for nothing in return. And your reward will be great. There's what you reap what you sow. And you will be sons of the highest, for he is kind to the unthankful and evil. God is still good to us even when we are in rebellion to him. He still provides. Matthew's account, in Matthew chapter 5, we'll notice the last verse there in verse 48, therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. But that's the challenge. It's not really being nice because someone was nice to you. It's really, when it boils down to it, is that you're still nice to someone who is at your throat. And so we would see over in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 11, blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Is that where we're sowing? Are we still sowing to the evil? Are we sowing to, and I'm not talking about sowing into the flesh type of evil. I'm talking about, are we still giving? Are we still prospering those who would rather see us dead? Who are persecuting us, who are hating us, who are completely against us. Over in verse 38 of Matthew chapter 5, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him too. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. How many times have we sinned against God and he didn't, because I'm pretty sure y'all are all still alive right now as I speak, didn't just strike us down. But you've heard me use this scenario. Someone cuts us off on the freeway and we wish we could just pull out a bazooka and blow them away. How challenging it is to do unto others as we would want them to do unto us. So we've looked at this already to a certain degree anyways. I like Michael Josephson, hard time saying that. He has defined it as this, if you will. The core of the golden rule is a moral obligation to treat others ethically for their sake, not ours. Even if it's better than the way they treat us. Why? Not because it's advantageous, but because it's right. It's because what God has already shown us by example through the giving of his Son while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. But we continue, because it's right and because the way we treat others is about who we are, not who they are.